Hello. We're live.
Yes, we are.
Absolutely. Good to see you again.
Likewise,
Yeah,
Shane.
Absolutely.
As always.
Today we are talking about sharpening. So welcome back to our live sessions. This is us at Bauer. We're doing these live sessions every week. This week it's woodworking. Last time we were on, we de-rusted a bunch of tools.
Yeah, it was tool maintenance and
that
fixing
saw,
up.
in fact,
This saw was fixed up.
Yep.
This was part of that. This was actually the one that we took apart on the day and de-rusted. So you can see there's still a bit of pitting and stuff from that process, but all the rust is gone.
Yeah. And we did a few chisels as well, and I've got a chisel here that we're going to try and put a new handle on.
The axe handle was the axe that we put the old handle back on, so it was just the same handle, we just reattached it.
And a hammerhead as well, and a few other things.
Yep.
So today, now that we've gotten these tools, you know, got the rust off them, we started making new handles. We're going to continue along that process. I'm going to make a new handle I'm going to put a new handle on this chisel here that's all de-rusted, and then we're going to talk about how to sharpen them. Because you definitely need your tools to be sharp to be able to work with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can work with blunt tools, but it's not much fun.
And it's also really dangerous. One of the things that they say is that a blunt tool is a lot more dangerous than a sharp tool, which I have mixed feelings about.
Yeah, so do I actually. I think the reason they say that is because you need to exert so much more force to make them work. So if you slip, you've got all this power behind them.
Yeah.
But sharp tools can cut you without any force whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
there's a...
Yeah. Don't know how much sense that makes.
Be safe regardless.
Yeah.
But if you want your tool to do what you want it to do, it's got to be sharp. You try and put a blunt thing through a piece of wood or even a tomato or anything, and it's going to crush. It's going to have a hard time. So being able to get it really sharp is essential to being able to focus on what you want to achieve as a result, versus just struggling.
Yeah, it just gives you so much more control over the tool.
Yeah.
Cool. So what are we going to do first, Mr. Shane?
We're going to start with your basic blades. We're going to start with the most simple of all blades ever, which is a chisel. You've got a straight piece. You've got a flat bottom here, which should be perfectly flat, and we're going to put a bevel on it that comes down, so we're basically creating a wedge there. The sharp as a concept is really simple. Like, it seems like a mythical thing sometimes, and people go, is it sharp enough? What is sharp? But I think that it's a wedge. It's a really, really nicely polished wedge.
Yeah.
It's 2 points meeting that are completely straight. They meet at a point, and if they're polished beautifully, it's going to be sharp. That's
I think a good way I think you've described it to me once is if you've got that wedge and you look down on a mic, like you get really close up to that point, you'll find that there's lots of bumps and stuff on the edge, and so if you're going to get finer and finer sort of polishing stones that we're going to talk about today, you're going to just refine that edge, and then you can go in even further, and it'll be even sharper and even smoother. There's always going to be some kind of like microscopic kind of bumps and stuff on it. Yeah. But you're trying to refine.
The more you get that smooth and flat, the more likely you are to have a clean straight line. Yeah. I should preface by saying there's so many different arguments and theories about how to sharpen. We're going to show you some basic ones. Yeah. We're going to show you what ones that we use, but there are, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of different ways that people sharpen. And people will argue about the best way to sharpen. I don't know why. Just do sharpen. That's the only thing that matters to me. As long as whatever you're doing is the one that's going to work for you. That's all that matters.
Yeah, and I think from when you start kind of hearing all the different ideas, they can all contribute to your knowledge of sharpening. Yeah, they can all help.
Yeah. So we're going to start with chisels. We're going to do knives and axes, and we're going to go to saws towards the end. So your chisel is your most basic. That is your flat bottom, like I said before, and then a line that comes down. It's the most simple kind of wedge, and that's all we need. So it's a great place to start because we need this to be a completely flat surface here, and then we need to create a bevel that comes down to meet it. Now, as you can see, we've de-rusted it, but I don't know, Ash, can we get a close-up on that? You can see the end of that has been chipped. I don't know if it's been used to get rid of concrete, or it's hit a couple nails.
Opening a paint tin.
Opening a paint tin or something, but that is obviously not going to work well for us. We are going to need to take back the steel to a certain point and then create a new bevel on that entirely. So this is going to be a great example of having to basically remake a sharp edge, which is something really to note. So if you're buying secondhand chisels, you don't need to worry too much about how bad that looks if you're prepared to basically put a whole new edge on it. that end doesn't matter so much because we're gonna.
In fact, I think most of the second-hand chisels you'll find you'll need to do something like that. They've all had pretty rough lives, and it's very uncommon to find one that's in, ready to go.
Yeah. Even if you buy chisels new or blades new, you'll probably want to sharpen them, or definitely at some point once you've done this to them, you want to be able to sharpen them.
Absolutely.
Not that you will, but you will. First, though, before I get into sharpening, I do want to change this handle. You can see this handle has been broken and it's a little bit loose. So I want to just replace that handle. To take that off, one of the easiest ways to do it if you have a vise at home is to get that chisel in your vise, lock it in, and then I'll use it.
I'm going to hold it, but we can't do that, can we?
No. And then you can use basically a slotted screwdriver to get it around the base of that. Basically, I'm putting it around this area here.
It's going like that, and then he's getting the slotted screwdriver or the adjustable spanner. And then
I'm going to tap it.
Putting it over there like that, so this is the base of the handle, and then he's going to hit this. This is held in the vise. He's hitting this down, and that can jar that
straight off.
Straight off.
And then, so the handle itself has a little, what's called a ferrule, but it's just a little metal tube. This one's brass, and that should hopefully come off. And that's good. You get this back out. Now, what you have inside of this chisel is a tang. So this metal spike that goes down into the handle is referred to as a tang. That goes down into there, and then you can use your chisel. The other type of chisel you'll see is a socket type.
Yeah, I think
you have one?
The socket type.
Yeah, so that's, you can see that the chisel actually wraps around the outside of the chisel handle, versus in this one you've got a tang that goes down inside.
Yeah, like on that one the wedging, it's a wedge on the chisel end, whereas on this one it's the wedge on the handle end, kind of getting wedged inside that way in the socket.
Hopefully one of those explanations made sense.
Yeah.
The risk here is that when I put that in there I might split the timber, because obviously you're putting a wedge into a piece of wood and dropping it. So it might split, but that's where the ferrule comes in. So you put that little metal bit around the timber where that goes in, and that's going to stop that timber from being able to spread. I had already this morning quickly made up a replacement handle for it. So I've got that one made up. I just turned that on the lathe. You don't need to necessarily turn it on the lathe. You could, like I was doing last week, use a spoke shave to shape it up.
Absolutely.
But the main thing is you do need to get this bit here to be about the size of that same ferrule, so we can get that on there.
Yeah, and that's something if you didn't have a lathe, which a lot of people don't, you could whittle down with a knife, just slowly work down to that circle, and that would work fine.
Absolutely. Once it's in, then you've got to put a hole in it in the end. So you get it into your vise and you use your drill. Basically with that hole you want it to be about the same length as the tang and not too much thicker. Now you might want to have a thin drill bit that goes all the way to the end.
So you want the drill bit slightly smaller than the tang.
Slightly smaller, yeah. But there's a little bit of like give and play in there. So I drilled it. I put that in there. It needed to be a little bit looser. I fiddled it around. But ultimately you want it to get to about this point by hand, so there's not that much there left to do. And then the last bit, we are going to tap that in. Now because we've got a blunt end here, I can just do that. Can I do that on your bench? Thank you.
We've discussed that.
Do we have a question?
Yes. Would you need a drill to drill that hole?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Some form of drill. Doesn't have to be a power drill.
No, it could be a hand drill.
Little egg beater.
Yeah. But you will need a drill to be able to drill that out of some sort.
Yeah.
Once you've gotten that to the right fit, you can pop that on there. Make sure your ferrule is on in one of the holes.
Yeah.
Want this one?
Yeah, look at that.
Perfect fit. And then make sure the ferrule is on. And then tap that down.
Beautiful.
Until it fits in nicely.
Now you've got a custom tool.
And now you've got, so that little bit should be pretty tight up against there. I'm going to tap that a little bit more. So good. So we've got the ferrule protecting it there. And in fact, if you were to look in there, which you can't, you'd see that the wood is actually pressing out, but it's pressing out against that little brass bit.
Yeah.
So now it's nice and tight in there. That's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
We've got.
And that you were saying earlier that the shape of the tang, that tang is an actual square.
Yeah.
So if you would drill a round hole, the edges of that square will kind of wedge into the smaller sections of that circle.
But yes, that's the thing. You drill a hole, you put a square into it, and it's going to press out into those corners. So it's going to be a tight fit.
Yeah, and like you can pick up these handles as well if you're not feeling confident in making them. You can pick them up, you'll see, once you know what they look like now, you'll see heaps of them at second-hand stores.
Yeah.
Particularly from old files, like all these old files that we're going to use later on. These saw files, that's the tang at the end, and they could just use a rehandling.
Yeah. Last week, or not last week, but 2 weeks ago, when you did the new saw handle there, which looks really nice, you put in linseed oil on it. You soaked it in linseed oil. With this one, just to do something different, I put a shellac on it. So while it was on the lathe, actually, I put a cloth with some shellac on it while it was running to get a thin coat there. I let that dry. I sanded it back a little bit, and then I put a wax coat on it. And that's all that's on there, which would be fine because this is constantly going to be in my hand.
Getting oil all over it.
Yeah. So that's it. So now we need to be able to sharpen that. So the first thing there is to cut that blunt end, which I'm going to jump over to the grinder. So can you entertain?
Sure. All right, yeah, so
what I'm doing?
Yeah, so what Shane's doing, he's going over to a grinder, a power grinder, and with sharpening, it's about kind of working up the grits. So there's a balance between doing things quickly, but then getting it nice and fine as well. So on the big power grinder that he's over on now, which you'll probably start to hear in a moment, he's basically getting that rough shape. So he's going to start, when he comes back, let's see if we've got some examples here. So if you look on the edge of this one, the first step is to flatten the top. So on this chisel here, we've gone over to the grinder.
Yeah, I was just
Oh, hello.
This is it.
Bring them out to Muhammad.
Yeah. This is our grinder.
Okay, I'll get a G clamp for you.
Yeah.
This is fantastic viewing.
Yes, this is a little bit of live improvisation. So this is the grinder. This is an electric grind wheel here, circular wheel, that's driven by this motor, and we can place our chisel either straight up like that in order to get that flattened edge, or we can put it on the angle to start that bevel. So that's what Shane's going to demonstrate now.
Yeah.
I'm going to put this clamp on for him, so that
Yeah, because as it
stays safe.
it's going to vibrate,
Particularly this machine.
and it could vibrate off the table, which would be terrible. So I've got a visor on, as you can see. You
And you
could
might want
use
some ears as
safety
well.
glasses. This just happened to be around the corner because I was using the lathe earlier. You might want to put some ears on.
I've got some goggles around here somewhere. What did I do with them?
But the main reason for that is as you grind, you're going to get little pieces of steel. Oh, I'm going to start talking a lot louder now that I have
What?
it on. So you're going to get little pieces of steel flying off. They'll look like sparks when you're doing it, and you do not. Oh, that changes. And you do not want to get any of that in your eyes or really much on your face at all. So some sort of protection here is a good idea. Where's my new chisel at?
Yeah, so he's going off camera now to get his new chisel. So one of the dangers you have with the grinder is because it's going so quickly, and as you're grinding, it generates a lot of heat.
Yes.
And that heat can actually damage the steel of this chisel and weaken it. I've heard it referred to as drawing the temper. Do you know much about the science of it?
So when these chisels are made, so all my gear on, and then I just talk to you for a while. So when these chisels are made, they should be blacksmithed, or they're made in a particular way, so they're brought up to different temperatures, and those different temperatures change the structure of the metal inside it. So when you've seen quenching, when they've got it hot and they stick it in like a bucket of cool water, what they're trying to do is they're trying to maintain the structure of the steel at its hot temperature, because if it cools down slowly, it changes.
Yeah.
So if they cool it really quickly, it keeps in this particularly nice structure in there. When you add heat to it, it can change the structure of the steel, and so there's a real risk there of doing that. Can I use your soapy water here?
Of course, yeah. And so what happens to that when it does change that structure? It softens easier. So basically, it doesn't. Once you sharpen it, it doesn't retain that sharp edge.
Yeah,
for as long.
it can do one of two things. It can either become more brittle, so it's more likely to chip, or it can end up softer potentially. Those are this has been heated to a specific temperature, so it's the right amount of hardness.
And so I was one of the first ways I was taught to test that for that heat is actually have your finger on the back of it, and when it starts to get hot, you can take it off, and then you can quench it.
Yeah.
But one thing to look out for is you'll actually see a discoloration of the metal. It's called bluing, and it looks like this little blue spot comes up. And I've done it a fair few times, and I've been impatient and rushing to do a
Which
chisel,
I will probably do today.
which we might do today, only as an example to show you guys at home what it looks like. Ears on. watch everything start to shake from this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when my nice ceramic mug falls off the bench. It takes a long time to run down, obviously, so you have to be very safe. This was one of the things that a couple weeks ago you were talking about. You can take these chisels to a store and they might be able to do this for you. So what I've done first, just so you know, is I've given it a new square end. So those huge chips are completely gone, right? It's nice and flat. So that way I brought it back to the point that I need to create the new bevel to, essentially. Now this is the bit where we need to create that new bevel. So at the moment we obviously don't have a wedge, we have a straight line, then a flat bit, and then it comes back down. So we need to bring that angle down until it meets the straight bit again. You can do that on this, but you really have to be careful of keeping it cool, constantly keeping it cool.
Yeah.
And it's not the most recommended, it's very slow.
Richard, do we want to get the other one?
Yeah, let's grab the other one.
So there's another grinder that Shane's going to get.
But the danger is obviously it's very slow.
Sorry.
What are you doing?
Sorry, I'm unplugging that one for you.
Oh, do you want to do this then? And I'll do this?
Yeah, I can do this.
Yeah.
Sure. There you go. Now you can take that. So what Shane's going to do, he's going to take this one away. He's going to grab that for us.
Yeah.
Whilst trying to exercise some social distance. And he's going to go and get another grinder. So this grinder it's a slow speed water cooled grinder. So it's pretty much exactly the same thing, except the wheel runs slower. And
space. I need a long space.
Yeah, we'll make some space. The wheel runs slower, and it's sitting in like a little container. Oh, there's water in there. It's sitting in a container of water, and so that water helps to cool the steel as you're grinding it. And so what that does is, even though it's running slower, it takes longer. So this is your normal grinder at the front, running
it's also
fast.
quieter, which is nice.
And this one back here is just running, it's just geared up, so it just runs slower. And you can see there's a bit of a shine on it. That's from the bath of water that it's sitting in. And so what that means is that although it kind of doesn't take off this material as quickly, it doesn't heat up the chisel in the same way that the fast one does. So you don't have the same risk of bluing the material.
It's also not going to shoot sparks out in any way.
And
so I can let that on there. I'm going to move it back and forth so I'm not grinding the same spot in the wheel.
Yeah, so although it goes slower, it's a faster way to do it because you're not stopping to quench it and to allow that steel to cool down every few 10 seconds or so. So it's a really good way to bring that up. These guys are a little bit more expensive. They're harder to find second hand as well. There's a very sort of famous brand of these, and they are about $700. I don't know how much this is quite a cheap brand. Don't know how much these things go for, but it works.
Can we just have a look?
Pretty
So
well.
you can start to see that new. So you see where the old metal is dark, and the new metal is shiny. So that's that new bevel that's being ground on it. Now I'm not going to keep going here because it'd be really boring television. You'd see me standing there for ages. But what you can see on another one that I have here is how you would start to get, and I think there's a better example here. This one's actually really good. So you can see on this one, that one's been previously ground. So you've got a nice new, completely ground bevel there. So that's what we would continue to do with this.
That one as well, just something to note. Particularly when we're grinding on the more traditional grindstone, we won't go all the way to the very tip. As we grind down, as we get closer and closer to that tip, you can still see there's a bit of a flat edge there. There's less metal to heat up, and so it heats up quicker, and it can blue quicker. So we get to a point where you can see it's got that initial bevel on the front, but then it's still flat on the tip. And now, and what Shane's going to demonstrate is going over to
your stone.
sharpening stones and finishing off that sharpening process.
Now, everything we've done up to now is not something you should have to do regularly. This is the process for if you've bought a new tool, it's really mangled, and you have to get it to nice sharp shape. Once you have done that the first time, or if you buy it and somebody's done that for you, or you send it away, you shouldn't have to go through that process ever again. Unless you drop your chisel on the ground or
Yeah.
hit a nail or lend it to someone who uses it as a paint tin opener.
Yeah.
So don't do that.
Or a carpenter, Ash.
Or some guy who doesn't really know anything and he just like uses it to smash into all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Ash handed one of his beautiful tuned up chisels to a carpenter once, and it came back looking pretty average.
Yeah.
That's not saying that's how carpenters treat their chisels by any means.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, I have water stones is what I use, but you can use oil stones as well, which is probably what you'll find. You'll find often these combination stones, that sort of thing. So I've got a set of water stones. I like them just because I don't really like having to use oil, and I know they work really well. They're what I'm used to using, so that's what I prefer to use.
And what are the main differences between the two?
One of the main difference between an oil stone and a water stone is in the name. So it's the lubricant that you put on it when grinding the steel away. So with an oil stone, you don't really want to just put your steel against it and grind it. It'll be a bit aggressive, it'll pull, it'll move. So you put something on it, you put a little bit of sewing machine oil or 3-in-1 oil on there, and then you can work that around and it moves a little bit more smoothly, which gives you a better chance of getting a nice clean edge. With the water stones, you just use water. You put water, you let them soak in water, some of them, and then that way they're ready to go when you need to use them. So I'm not going to go through the whole process here, and in fact,
Do you need some water?
what I might do, yeah. Oh, well, I've got this, so I'll be fine. I'll just make a mess. I'm going to, look at how sad that's
Oh,
looking
wow.
at the moment. Yeah, I know. So I'm going to actually do it on this big steel wedge here because it's a little bit bigger and a little bit easier to demonstrate.
That's coming out of a...
So this is coming out of a Japanese plane. So you can see it's the same thing. It's a wedge of steel. So there's a couple ways to do this. One way that we both started with, I think, was to do it freehand like this and work up and down the stone that way.
Yep.
So that's probably the easiest, I think, for a lot of people to do.
Yeah, I think I started with that. I think there was this. There's a samurai carpenter. He's one of the YouTube dudes.
people, yeah.
He's got good at sharpening. He's a bit of kind of a character.
Yeah.
With a sort of an angle like this, holding down, so it's almost like on a slight angle. Similar with your elbows in.
Yeah.
And just holding like that. But again,
Yeah.
it's just...
The most important thing is because you need to, actually I'm going to grab this first, because you need to have two perfectly flat surfaces, you need to hold it at a set angle. If you start to rock or move, you're going to end up rounding that edge. So you want to do the back first. The back is the most important bit. That's got to be, and it really is, getting that back flat is so important to having a nice sharp chisel. You can always keep regrinding this edge, but if the back isn't flat all the way to the edges, you're not going to have a satisfyingly sharp chisel. I mean, it'll work for a lot of things, but... So that's a matter of I'm putting my pressure on here, keeping that flat, and going forward and back and forward and back and forward and back and forward and back on there. And I lift it up, straight up. If you are doing this and you kind of in mid-motion lift up with your handle, you're obviously going to rock that up that way and you're going to create a curve there.
And you don't, when you're moving it backwards and forwards, you don't want to be rocking in any direction. Like Shane said, you want to keep that just dead flat, that one bevel edge as flat as possible. And it's a little bit easier on that flat side, you could say, because you've got a little bit more room to place it on, as opposed to...
You got a question?
Yeah. What could we do if we didn't have one of those stones at home? Is there another way we could sharpen? If we didn't have a
You
stone?
could get some, like... my first thing would say is to grab a stone.
Yeah.
It's a pretty affordable. They're long lasting. One of these guys, these oil stones here, which are probably more accessible, they've got two sides on it, so they've got your like a coarser and a finer, so you can work up the grits. Yeah, they're not expensive.
It's taking me a while to get to doing this again because I haven't done it this way in ages.
You could get some sandpaper, like some sticky back sandpaper, and put it on a piece of glass, float glass, which is the way that glass is made. It produces a very flat surface, so you can stick that sandpaper onto it. You can get sticky back sandpaper. I know there's a lot of sharpening methods out there on YouTube using the sandpaper and a glass float. There's a Japanese tool supplier.
Oh yeah, that's a really
Sydney.
good point. Sandpaper on a piece of perfectly flat glass.
Yeah.
It's a great way to start.
So you're always keeping that flat, because what can happen with the stones is that not only is the stone abrading the metal, but you're actually, the metal or the chisel or whatever you're sharpening is also abrading that stone. So over time, what will happen is generally you'll get a hollow in the middle of that stone, which we need to flatten. So that's what Shane's doing now, is he's sharpened a little bit on the stone. So now he's getting his diamond plate.
This is a diamond plate. You don't need a diamond plate, but you just need something that you can flatten with.
Yeah, to flatten the stone. Whereas if you use that method of getting a nice bit of glass, super flat glass, and putting the sandpaper on top of it, once you've kind of dealt with the sandpaper, it's lost its grit, or it's just worn down. You remove that, the glass is still perfectly flat, and you put another piece on. So that's another option. I hope that answers your question. But yeah, the short answer is just get a sharpening stone. They're very, very handy. You can keep it forever, or for a long time anyway, depending on how much you sharpen.
Yeah. Definitely. I think, ultimately, if you have something you're sharpening, you're going to need to sharpen it over and over and over again. So it's a good thing to get in the habit of, especially if you're going in woodworking. If you're, just occasionally using the tools, they should hold up, keep them in good shape. But if you do want to do more, you want to do more repair, you want to fix up more things on the side of the road, getting into good sharpening practice is great. Definitely. And the other thing about getting into good sharpening practice, if you're going to be using chisels and hand tools, is that if you're trying to learn freehand, like the method I'm doing right now, it also teaches you good hand skills. So being able to train your body to hold this in a specific way, to provide pressure in the right way, is training to help you to be able to then later hold the tool in a certain way and be able to cut the way that you want it to do. So you're kind of doubling up on your skill building at the same time.
Yeah, and there is that freehand that Shane's demonstrating now, particularly on the bevel edge. It does take a little bit of practice and a little bit of patience to kind of get there and to get it right. But it is a skill that anyone can pick up with a little bit of work. There is a tool though that's hanging over to your left, Shane, I think, which is what a lot of people start with. It's what I start with. I still use, and this guy is called a honing guide. And you can pick this up from a woodwork supply store. And what this does is it actually sets the angle for you. So you can see, if you look at it this way, there's a little wheel down the bottom, here like that. And then on the top, you've got two little cradles. So this middle one is for chisels, and this wider one at the top is for plane blades. And so what we can do with that is I can get a chisel, and actually, so there's a screw on the side which opens and closes the jaws of it. So I'm closing that now, and I'm going to put my chisel in there on that bottom cradle. Now on the side of the tool, I don't know if you can see that, if get some focus going. Anyway, it says chisel projection, 30 degrees and 25 degrees. So 25 degrees is the primary bevel that we put on with the grinder. So if you've got one of those ones with can you pass me the chisel that's got the primary on it? That one? Yeah. So on this one here, that angle of that, so from the flat up, is 25 degrees. Now what we can do, using this honing guide method, is actually put a secondary bevel on it, which is at a slightly steeper angle at 30 degrees. And I'll get one of my chisels over here, which I'm sure probably has that. So this is a pretty extreme example, but if you look at that one there, so that one's glistening. That front angle is my 25 degrees, sorry, my 30 degrees, and the back was my initial primary bevel.
Do you have a question from someone?
Yeah, Stephen Dwyer has asked any tips for sharpening secateurs.
Yes, we did this recently. Yeah, we did it for on Gardening Australia. I just used
a quick mention there of having been on Gardening Australia.
that was a bit of a name drop, but it wasn't meant to be. So with the secateurs, you've got two sort of flat edges coming together. So try to avoid them as much as possible and work on, you'll have the bevels coming in from memory, and you want to you can use a file just to sharpen that edge of the secateurs, the curved edge, and then what will get created is what's called a burr, and that's something that we need to explain as well.
Yeah, I think I'd like to step back and just kind of recap some of this a little bit.
Yeah,
because we've kind of done a few things here. So,
and we'll get back to that secateur question as well.
Yes.
Once we've
So this will apply to secateurs as well. It's mostly, and it's the same with a knife, which we'll be covering in a second. The process is similar. It's just about where you're finding that angle to work. So when you're working with sharpening, so obviously you've seen we've ground it to a rough shape, and one of the best descriptions up at Suikasha that they said is your first stages are just making the shape. You're making that wedge shape, and then your sharpening is your polishing at the end. So you're working from really coarse grits up to really fine grits to polish them. So this one here, the stone that I start at, this is 400 grit, which is fairly coarse. Oh no, this is, 400. Then I've got a 1000 grit that I jump up to from there. And then I've got a 6000 or an 8000 or a 10,000. They're all roughly in the same range up to there. And working from 400, then once you've got it the right shape and it's happy to go on that one, then you jump up and you're polishing that same shape on your 1000, continuing to make it right. And then you come up to your 6000, 8000, 1000, 10,000. I mean, and that's polishing those surfaces. That's where what he was talking about before on that microscopic level. You really want perfectly flat, smooth surfaces. And that's your process. The more complicated area is when you get into what angle you're holding it at. And that's where with the secateurs or with the knife.
Secateurs, I always have trouble saying that word.
Oh yeah, that's awful. So with this, I'm holding it at this angle or this angle because that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But with our knife, that's going to be a little bit different. I might change my angle partway through, which is what I do.
I think for the knife, you're looking at about sort of you're after a 30-degree angle, so kind of similar to your chisel and your plain blade as well.
Which I'll get into in a minute.
But that's a good point. Like a lot of the times, you can kind of copy what's there. If you've got an old tool, you don't necessarily have to get the protractor out or a honing guide. If you kind of copy sort of what's already there, you're on the right path. If it's a couple of degrees here and there, it's not the biggest problem.
And that's a great
in the world.
place to start. It's just to pick up a tool that's kind of okay and start sharpening it, using it the angle that's there, and don't stress too much over it to start with. As you work, you'll find out naturally this angle breaks a lot more, this one doesn't, and you'll learn these things as you go. Or you can look them up online and get very, very particular about it.
Sure. Yeah.
Did you have another question?
Yes. So Julie Nixon has
G'day, Julie.
G'day, Julie.
Ew.
I need help in sharpening a garden shovel for digging out roots.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. You did that as well on Gardening Australia.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago.
So
This is the famous and sacred Merrill shovel. This one's we can sharpen it. This one wasn't sharpened, so you can look at the end of that shovel there, and it's a bit rough. And obviously, you might expect that end to be rough. It's a shovel. You dig it in soil and you're hitting rocks, and it's. But what you can do, if you look closely as well, you might see that there is a slight bevel on that underside. Can you see that on the camera? Basically, along this edge, there is a slight bevel going off like that, which is separate to the sort of thickness of the soil. So we can just grab a file. You could clamp it in something if you wanted, or not, but
That's a nice sound.
do you like that? How's that sound at home? Let us know, because it sounds fine to me.
We
here.
could just do this for the rest of the show if it's a nice sound.
So we're just getting a metal file. So this is a tool for filing metal, and essentially it's a coarse sharpening filing implement.
I mean, that's your coarsest level. But for this, because you're going into soil and you're going into rocks anyway, you're not going to spend the same amount of time that you do trying to get something sharp for wood.
In fact, you don't want to have such a refined angle for sharpness. You still want it to be sharp enough to cut through the soil, but you want it to be sort of robust enough to hold that edge for longer. And so the thinner like that, obviously the sharper your cut will be, but then as you spread out like that, it becomes a stronger edge. So simply put, that's super easy. Get a file and work on that edge and work all the way around. Good question.
Yeah, great question. Do you have any more questions from anyone? Great. So, I mean, we love questions. Not to say questions are bad, but that means I can move on to, you wanted to talk about burrs as well.
Yes,
Something to mention, when you're grinding this metal, what's going to happen is little bits of metal are going to stay stuck to it but curl over the edge, and that's called a burr. You're just going to get little pieces of steel hanging out on the underside, still attached, but like...
And that's it's a really good indication of when you've made it to the edge.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to move forward until you've got that burr. So if you're sharpening like that, that's it. Yeah.
So if I'm trying to get this level, you know, we've put that flat on the end, we've ground it really close to perfect, and now I'm putting this against an abrasive stone to bring it back. I need to make sure I bring it back so that it's making good contact with the flat surface back
so
here.
like apex is at 0, would you say?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so
That's what I say all
comes
the
into
time.
that. So as opposed to having a bit like a little flat bit at the end, you want it to come up until it meets it.
Yeah.
And the best way to be absolutely sure that that's happened is to make sure you've got a burr.
Yeah.
And it's
If
something.
you've been doing this for a while and you run your finger off the edge there, you start to feel little bits of steel if you've made it all the way. If you haven't yet, you won't feel them.
Yeah.
And so it's a nice extra indicator to know that you've definitely gone to that edge.
Yeah, it's
and then you
important.
just take that burr off by flattening the back.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, just a couple of strokes. So yeah, you get the bevel all the way up, burr comes around, turn it over, a couple of strokes, just remove the burr, and that's it.
And that's, I mean, we kind of all over the place, but that's the basic process of sharpening anything.
And so getting back to those secateurs, however you say that blasted word. If you work on that, tree scissors. If you work on the beveled edge, wait till that burr comes round, and then just like you could even just close them to get rid of that burr, but you don't want to muck around with that flat edge where the two pieces meet, because if you put a bevel on those flat edges, then the sharp points won't meet. They'll be slightly off, and you'll start having your secateurs binding. So you want them to meet nice and flat. So work on the bevel edge, not the flat edge.
Yep. Any other questions? Cool. We're going to jump quickly to then...
We're, just before we go, we're running a little bit behind schedule with all the things that we've got.
Yeah.
So as opposed to, what do you think, as opposed to rushing through them, we might just do what we can do, and if we don't get to saws and stuff, it could, because there's so much with this stuff. We can talk for hours, and there's so much information about it.
Yeah.
We'll see how we go for time to whether we get for saws, but if we don't do it today, we'll do it another time for sure, because it's awesome.
Yeah, and if we're going too fast, let us know. If you need to jump back or anything,
Yeah.
if you're not,
We
we're
got
here to get you the information you need. So if you're not getting it, let us know, and we can do what we can.
Totally.
I'm not going to spend any more time on chisels though, because that's pretty much straightforward. Once you get that handle on what it is, you work up your stones. That's all it is.
Oh, let's just quickly talk about the. Should we talk about micro bevels?
Yeah, I don't like them, but go ahead.
So with the
You did mention it briefly.
yeah,
before.
I'd just like to finish that. So on this honing guide, you've got your chisel projection. One is, and on here you've got your 25 degrees and 30 degrees. For your primary bevel, the chisel projection is 1 3/4 inches. So this is an American tool or an old tool. So we set our chisel out at that distance, and then what that does is that sets that angle. So it takes away that kind of that learning curve of skill of getting that perfect like that. You'll have this lovely angle, and it'll hold that angle, and that with that wheel on the. In fact, I'll set up. Could you pass us is there a ruler, steel rule right there? To your right, that's it. Thank you. So I'm going to set this to so it's 1 3/4 for 25, 1 1/4 for 30, which is our micro bevel. And so what the micro bevel's doing is, so on this guy here, you've got your primary bevel. It's just tilting the chisel up a little bit further to make another smaller bevel on the front. And basically you're doing that to remove less material, so you're not working the whole bit of the primary bevel. I think one of the reasons Shane doesn't like that micro bevel is that that's harder to hold freehand, that tiny little bevel. So you want to have more of a flat surface so you can hold it and reference it and just work on that primary bevel. But for doing it quickly, I mean, for people starting out straight away, this is how I started on it. It gets pretty bloody good results.
Yeah.
With a lot
And
of ease.
especially if you're a bit shaky, or you've got arthritis or something, being able to hold that so firmly in one place can be a bit difficult.
Yeah.
This tool is very, very helpful for that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
I guess.
Do you have another question?
Just
Good questions today.
Just a brief one from Colin Smith saying,
Hi, Colin.
Saws, please.
Please.
So please. Sure.
All right. Well, let's. What do you want to do? Do you want to jump to saws then? We got the questions.
Well, yeah, we can go to saws. Absolutely, I'm happy to go to saws.
Let's do it.
Okay, maybe we'll go because we've got
We'll
a couple.
do axes.
We'll have
another time.
Yeah, we'll have an axe day. All right, so saws. So these are the saws that we
That wasn't a question though.
No,
But
it was
No, it could have been a
It's
question.
an exclamation mark.
saws, please. Saws, please. So these are the two saws that we fixed up last week.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have a go at sharpening, or at least demonstrating how they are sharpened. We probably won't go through the whole process because that takes time. Although not too much time. And in fact, something interesting, I sharpened a saw of mine this afternoon when I was kind of getting ready for this, which was reasonably sharp. Resharpening a reasonably sharp saw takes about 20 seconds, or maybe 30. It was
Yeah.
so quick, just boom, you just have to do one quick pass. So kind of like maintaining your tools as you go.
So much easier. And it's
Similarly
the same
with
with
the chisels,
chisels or
blade
your
blades.
kitchen knives. Like we were saying, you only have to do that grinding the first time around. But if you wait until your chisels are really bad, your sharpening process becomes so much slower and so much more work. Whereas if you keep sharpening regularly, it's just a quick little thing that you build into your processes and you have happy tools all the time.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so when we're sharpening saws, there's two things we need to know. There are two types of saw teeth, and they are sharpened in such a way to cut timber slightly differently. And so it's important to know the difference between those two before you start sharpening, because there's two slightly different techniques.
Yep.
So we've made some Dave, one of our volunteers, made these beautiful little oversized diagrams. And so this is what we refer to as a rip cut sawtooth, and this is pretty simple.
What is a rip cut?
Rip cut. So the rip cut is
I don't know.
it's what we use to cut timber along the grain. So I think Shane's grabbing us a bit of timber.
This is a piece of plywood.
Oh, this is good actually. It's got a nice bit of grain. Oh wait, that's going to fall out and hurt someone. All right, so in timber we have things called the grain. So timber was a tree. It has all these vessels going up and down to transport nutrients. When we chop it down, we refer to that as the grain. And that's where the strength of the timber is, along the grain. So it's more difficult to break the grain in half than it is to split it. As you can see there, it's just splitting along the grain. And when you cut timber, when timber is milled, that's considered. So if we had the grain running this way, the thing would just break. So the grain's going along like that.
Yep.
So when we chop it with a handsaw, we need to think about that. So
And the wood will respond differently to your saw. Obviously,
Yep.
you're cutting across those straws. It's a little bit different than cutting
cutting
around.
along those straws, exactly. So now with the rip cut tooth, the teeth are sharpened in such a way to kind of make them resemble chisels facing this direction. Yeah. So these rip cuts, these western saws, they only cut on the push. So the teeth are angled this direction, sort of like waves breaking over this way, and they only cut on the push. And so if you can imagine, as we rip along the grain, so this is called ripping, as we go along there,
Along the grain. So like if you picture those strands and you were to rip them apart, that's your rip. You're going with the direction of the grain.
yeah. So those chisels will come in and cut that grain,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll cut it.
And like split it almost.
So that's the rip cut. So now the other type of cut, and we'll obviously go into how we sharpen those. The other style of cut is this one is a cross cut.
And that's, of course, going to go the other way.
Yeah, exactly. So and that's going across the timber like that.
Wow.
So now with this one, this is sharpened in a slightly different way. So actually, I'll bring back the rip. I skipped ahead here. So when we're sharpening these guys, and I'll demonstrate it, we basically get one of these, which is called a saw file. You might have seen these.
Just triangular file.
Just a triangular file essentially, but that's a saw file. It's for sharpening saws. That saw file sits in these grooves here, and you hold it to the angle that you want, and we'll talk about that more in a sec. And we push that through at a 90-degree angle, like that, and that's what sharpens the teeth, and it gives us this chisel profile. Now with the cross cut, which is designed for cutting across the grain, we do it slightly differently. So we still use our triangle file or a saw file, but we have it on a slight angle.
I'm going to angle that way, so
Which way?
tilt forward. Tilt forward.
I like that.
Yeah.
So slight. Yeah, that's right. So a slight angle, so not 90 degrees, but actually on a slight angle, like that. And when we sharpen this one, we go 1,
Skip a tooth.
skip a tooth, 2, skip a tooth, and then flip the saw around, or change your angle back to the opposite way, and then 1, skip a tooth, 1, skip a tooth, 1, skip a tooth, and so on and so forth. And what that gives us is like a knife edge. So it creates a bevel on the sides of these teeth, and that acts like a knife. So I've coloured them in here with a bit of texture. So there's a little
Beautiful colouring job.
Yeah, thank you. That was done under duress and time constraints.
It's done in the 30 seconds before we started.
So what that does now is those knife edges that we've created slice through the timber.
Yeah.
So they're slicing
Cut those
and
fibers
cutting those
rather
fibers.
than ripping them apart.
Now, if you were to use a crosscut going ripping along the grain, those knives kind of slide in between the grain, and they don't do as good a job of cutting that timber. And if you are to use, say, a rip cut across the grain, those chisels can actually grab the grain and
Tear it apart.
and tear, and you get tear out, which is a problem with woodworking.
That was actually really good, I think, just breakdown of the different saws, but also the sharpening process. Because the whole sharpening process is essentially taking that file and running it between those teeth, either straight across if it's a rip, or angling it and doing every other one if it's a crosscut. Which, do you want to demo?
Yeah, we'll do a quick.
Do we have a question?
Yeah, so Julie Wilson has asked,
Hey, Julie.
what about for pruning saws? Depends on the teeth.
Pruning saws.
Pruning saws.
Yeah, no, it's very similar. It's very similar.
A little bit easier to get at because they're quite.
It's a different,
wide
but it's
set.
actually generally they're a different, because on pruning saws you'll find that they're a bit narrower and steeper. It's a different profile of saw file. And if I can just run around you.
Yeah, rather than like that. I'm doing weird symbols, but rather than like that kind of isosceles.
I think it's an
Equilateral. It's the equilateral triangle. It's a little bit more that sort of thing, so it can get into the teeth a little bit better. If you're not familiar with this type of saw, it's the one that's used more for cutting green branches, and green wood is slightly different than aged dry wood, so it's got a slightly different tooth shape. But once you find the saw file that's more in the right angle, hey, there's a steel.
Yeah, so this is what I've used for sharpening pruning saws. So it's a slightly different angle. It fits in the. I'm sure you could, if you know, like I found this second hand. I've actually never bought a saw file in my life. I've always found them second hand. But this one would be a little bit more. This is the first one I can remember seeing of this style. But maybe I wasn't looking for it until I had to prune a gardening saw for Gardening Australia. But yeah, it's essentially the same thing. Yeah, couldn't help myself. But it's essentially the same process of what we're going to go through. It's about matching that angle. On some pruning saws, like Japanese saws, there's a third cut, like you know how they do that on the tip of this, which complicates matters a little bit more.
Well, we're not going to do that today.
We won't get into that today. But if you want to do that, it's out there.
I think we're gonna just
So I'll start
demo that for the rest of the session, if you want to do that, and then we'll talk about any other questions that people have. We can maybe quickly get to some other things, but just do a real life example.
For sure. So we're going to start. We always teach we always start with the rip saws. One thing is, as well, is when you get down to smaller and smaller teeth on saws, a lot of the time they're just rip cut. Yeah. So because they're so fine, you can cross cut with the rip cut just to complicate things. So it's good. It's a simpler way of sharpening. So we always start with that. So what I've got here is a saw file, and this is a device to hold my saw nice and steady, but also hold it very close to the top. Because if I had it in a vise like that, there's all this vibration and stuff, and it would be even more unpleasant to listen to than what you're about to experience. So this is one, again, picked up second hand. There was a guy that was actually a friend's dad was retiring, and he had some tools he was getting rid of, and that to me is a work of art. So I was very happy to find that. But if you don't have one of these guys at home, which I didn't have for a long time, you can make a saw vise with just 2 bits of timber. Mm-hmm. And it's essentially exactly the same thing. Just 2 bits of timber that you can put your saw into, and there's a slight angle here to go over the handle, and there's a screw at the end to hold it together. And then you can put that in your vise or clamp it to something. Yeah. You just want to make sure that it is wider than the handle, so that the handle's not interfering with the vise when it closes. Yeah. But that does the job, and that's sort of simple. It works just as well as this. This is maybe a little bit quicker to use, but as far as how it works, that works just as well. So now the first thing I want to do when I'm sharpening my saw is what we call jointing the saw. And that's getting a file. So a file's got a nice flat edge, and I want to run, and this is a little bit counterintuitive because you're kind of blunting the saw, but I'm going to run the saw across it. Oh, sorry, the file across the saw.
And this is similar to the process. That's a nice sound. This is similar to the process we did before of flattening the end of the chisel so that we know what point we're working back to. So some of those teeth over time may have snapped off or may have blunted more than other teeth. So running that file across it gives you a new, fresh, straight line across those teeth. When you start filing, you know what you're working to, similar to what we did earlier today.
And so I've got most of them. What you're looking for is you want a little bit of chrome on every single one of those teeth. So if there's any teeth there that are missing, which there are a few, if you look like here, it hasn't touched it, here it hasn't touched it. There are some teeth that are just sitting a little bit lower than that. And so when we sharpen this up, there's the potential for those teeth to actually not do anything when you're sawing. It'll just miss the timber altogether. So I won't go to the end, but we would keep going along like that until we've got all of them.
Yeah.
All right, so now I'm going to put it back into the saw file. Saw vise, sorry. All right, and now I can go to my saw file, a little triangle. So now on these saws, there's a couple of terms that we'll throw out that you might not have heard before. One is rake, and that's the angle that these teeth are sitting at, particularly this leading edge here, that leading edge here.
And that's created by the angle that you put your saw file at.
Yeah, exactly. And
That's
so
great,
there's actually a really good resource, robcosman.com. He's a Canadian woodworker. If you type in Rob Cosman saw geometry, there's a really good write-up of all the different types of hand saws, particularly Western hand saws, and the geometry of these teeth and what the angles are. You can have slightly different angles for hardwood and softwood. Softwood's generally leaning back a little, is leaning forward a little bit more than hardwood because hardwood's harder. So if it's leaning too far forward with hardwood, it can be a bit aggressive. And I think I've been guilty of sharpening my saws a little bit too aggressive in the past. So what I've created is a little guide for me here. So basically I've got a little stick of timber and then I've marked 6 degrees. So we want 6 degrees on this, a 6 degree angle of rake. So you've got 90 degrees like that, just tilted back at 6 degrees. I've marked that on a bit of timber and then I've chiseled out a little hole for my saw file so the back edge is on that 6 degree. And so I can use that now as a guide. So if I keep this nice and flat, that's at 6 degrees. Obviously like that it's not, like that it's not. And I can kind of do a reasonably good job of keeping that. Again, if it's not perfect, it doesn't really matter. If it's a little bit off either side. And with these rip cuts, because we're creating that flat chisel kind of edge, we just want to go 90 degrees across. So I've just done a couple at the tip here.
You'll be able to do about 5 teeth there, and then we'll have to wrap up for the day.
Oh, really? Is that, are we that close?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So we're just going to go forward, and I'm going to look at it until it's all chrome. And I've done a few here already, and I know it's about 3 or 4 passes. And we want to keep that consistent. Like we don't want to do 1 pass and then go to the next one, do 4. You're going to get jagged teeth. So you want to keep them consistent. So we'll go to 4.
It's nice, isn't it? Yeah.
Skip a tooth. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's pretty horrible. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now
do this around young children.
So this does take time, but not that much time. Like that would probably take me, I reckon, maybe 5 minutes or so to get through there. And if we look at the top of that tooth, you'll be able to see, and I can see from here.
I saw it when you
not
moved it.
Not only the chrome, but the actual geometry of the tooth. You're getting some sharp edges there.
Yeah.
So you go all the way through there. You've got essentially a sharp tool. Now the last thing we need to do just quickly before we go is with saws is you need to set them. So basically on saws like this, I think we talked about it briefly last week perhaps.
The teeth kind of...
They set out, so one set this way, the other one set that way, and so on and so forth. And what that does, so now if we're looking down at the saw like that, you can imagine it sort of looks like this. So you've got, here's the saw plate or the body of the saw, and then the teeth are set out at angles like that. And what that allows is, so as you're sawing through timber, the teeth do the cutting, and above the teeth, the kerf, or this gap here, is wider than the body of the saw. And that allows the saw to travel freely. And that's really key with sawing. If you've got a beautifully sharp saw and you've got no set on it, it'll just bind in that really narrow curve.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we use for that is a thing called the saw set.
Saw set.
Great little tool. I think this was like our first little promo together, Ash. We talked about
That
this.
was the one. That was the tool.
And so what it's doing is, and I'll see if I can demonstrate, make sure I'm on the right side. We put it in here. This is going to might be hard for you to see, but there's a little tooth. Can you tell me which way to go, Ash? Up, 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 up?
Yep.
About there. There's a little tooth in there that basically bends the sawtooth over.
Can you see it?
Can they see it? Having trouble holding it, actually.
Look it up. If you
Yeah.
can't see it, look up a video of it.
I'll
There's
show you
definitely
this, but
something
I'll
out
show
there.
you how the thing works. Can you see that in there? You see that little tooth? It just pushes the tooth over. So you go along and you're skipping. So you'll go push one over, skip a tooth. Push one over, skip a tooth. Go all the way along. That I find harder than sharpening. Although that sound sucks, when you're just trying to zero in with your eyes, maybe it's my eyesight, but I start to trip out a little bit just trying to focus on that thing.
Do we have any final questions for the day?
Shanks has just asked for knives, but
Yeah, we did want to do knives. I'll just quickly say
Yeah, we can quickly go.
the main thing
go
about.
for it.
I mean, there's nothing that says we have to stop at 12.
No.
But
Well, don't let them know that.
yeah. Shh. So the main thing with your knives, similar to what I was doing here, you want to hold your angle. Is you just want to hold your angle here. Obviously, the knife is a bit longer, so as you work it on the stone, you kind of, I like to rotate it that way, so that way I'm always working across. But it's just, again, a matter of getting in the hang of holding that at a consistent angle.
Yeah.
And I do tip up a little bit when I
And
get
it comes
to
with practice. And I mean, this is actually something that Shane told me about, but it was more about upholstery. Like getting secondhand materials, a lot of things are, in many people's eyes, aren't viewed as really worth much. They get chucked out. Get an old knife. Get a sharpening stone. Learn how to sharpen on that old knife. You know? What's the worst that can happen? That's a secondhand knife that I picked up. I think it's German. The steel's pretty good on it.
Yeah, I mean, that'll, even just, this is my Corsa stone, which is 400. That'll already start to work so much nicer. The steels, I'll just make a quick note about these kind of things that you often see people doing this with. That steel doesn't sharpen it. It just, as you're working it, you'll get little burrs on the knife, and it'll remove burrs off of it. So it's good to use quickly before you do anything. But if you do want to get it sharp, every now and then, take it to a set of stones. 400, 1000 is going to be enough. You don't need to take these to
Yeah, so it's
10,000.
not sharpening in the same way of removing materials, but we'll have a bit of a sharpening effect just to kind of get the edge back.
Yeah, but this process, and it's just about holding that angle, running it across this side, flipping it over, and running it the other side.
And one more point on that as well is you might, if you do pick up sort of one of these just oil stones you get from the hardware store, you can lubricate that with dishwashing detergent and water.
Yeah.
That's what most of the chefs do out there.
And you can
that
get
use
one of
those
these
things.
combinations that's a 400 and a 1000, and that'll be all you need
Yeah,
for your
for
stone.
sure. That'll be
The only
more than
thing
enough.
else you would want is something to flatten that every
Yeah.
now and then.
Just make sure you tell your family and whoever's going to use it that you've sharpened the knives.
Yeah.
Because I did that and my stepmom cut a finger.
Yeah. Once they are sharp, and they will cut really, really well. So be careful.
Yeah.
And if you drop them, don't try and catch them in midair, as I have done once. Don't do
That's
that.
a great tip. That's probably the tip of the day.
Don't catch knives by the blade
Yeah.
with your skin.
And on that note,
And then let's wrap it up. So next week we've got Kate and Arian doing clothing repair.
that's going to be awesome.
Yeah. So we're jumping away from the normals of the woodwork and electrical. We're going to be bringing in Kate and Arian to do kind of clothing repair. They're going to be talking about. They want to talk about kind of your basic sewing kit and a couple basic stitches. Maybe darning. I really want to learn how to do darning.
And is it bikes after that as well?
Bikes is going to be the week after that, so we're going to get in with, I've got a couple people that I'm talking with about doing that, so that's going to be fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll be tuning in
And
for
then the plan going forward is to actually do that, so once a month it'll be us, once a month it'll be electrical, clothing, bikes, and we can continue on.
And is there a survey in the
There's
comments?
no, just leave comments and let us know what you'd like to see more of, or what
please
didn't
do.
work for you. Just chuck them in the comments.
Yeah.
Or send us messages. If you have questions about clothing or bikes or woodwork, send them to us throughout the week or any time, and we can then try and address the questions that you actually have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next time we're here, we're going to do finishing.
Finishing, yeah, I think, yeah.
Wood finishing, which would be a lot of fun. I think Ash and I are going to do that one.
And I get to learn how to use a computer.
Yeah. And if you had anything
my
you want to
strength.
know more about, we do one-on-one sessions this afternoon. Book in one of those on the website. And yeah, have a wonderful
Yeah, have a good
wonderful
weekend.
afternoon. All right.
Thanks, guys.
See you next time.
Bye.